Flew home for Thanksgiving, but my mom met me at the door and said, "There's no seat for you this year. It's just family tonight." I nodded, turned around, and left without a word. An hour later, my sister texted, "Don't take it personally. You always make things awkward." That night, I transferred the final mortgage payment back into my account. By morning, group chat was exploding and voicemail was full. I, 29M, had been paying my parents' mortgage for 3 years without anyone knowing, and I thought I was coming home to a family that appreciated me. I was wrong. The flight from Denver to Chicago felt longer than usual that Thanksgiving. I'd been working double shifts at the engineering firm, saving every penny to help Mom and Dad keep the house after Dad's heart attack left him unable to work full-time. The mortgage was crushing them, and when I found out they were 2 months behind, I quietly started making the payments. $800 every month, transferred directly to the bank. They thought Dad's disability checks were covering it. I pulled into the driveway around 4 in the afternoon, carrying the bottle of wine I'd picked up at the airport and a small gift bag with the watch I'd bought for Dad. The house looked warm and inviting, golden lights spilling from the windows, and I could smell turkey through the front door. Mom opened the door before I could knock, but instead of her usual bear hug, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. Her face was tight, apologetic, but firm. She told me there wasn't a seat for me this year. "Just family tonight," she said, like I was some distant acquaintance who'd shown up uninvited. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, processing what she'd said. Through the window, I could see my sister's husband laughing at something, my nephew running around the living room, and my uncle carving the turkey. The dining room table was set for 8 people. Everyone was there except me. I nodded, told her I understood, and walked back to my rental car. Mom called after me, saying maybe we could do lunch tomorrow, but I was already backing out of the driveway. The drive to the hotel was a blur. I checked into a Hampton Inn near the airport and sat on the bed, staring at my phone. An hour later, my sister texted me. She said not to take it personally, that I always made things awkward. Apparently, last Christmas I'd been too quiet, and it made everyone uncomfortable. She said Mom thought it would be better this way. I sat in that hotel room for another hour, thinking about every family gathering I'd attended in the past 3 years. The stilted conversations, the way everyone seemed to talk around me rather than to me. I thought about the mortgage payments I'd been making, the vacation I'd canceled to help with Dad's medical bills, the weekends I'd spent alone because I was sending money home instead of going out with friends. Then I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer. $800 a month, back into my account where it belonged. I didn't sleep much that night. By 6 in the morning, my phone was buzzing with notifications from the family group chat. Messages were flying back and forth, but I didn't read them. I turned off my phone and went down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. When I finally turned it back on around noon, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The group chat had exploded. My sister had called 6 times, Mom had called 4 times, and Dad had left 3 voicemails that I could see were each over 2 minutes long. I listened to Dad's voicemails first. In the first one, his voice was confused and panicked. The bank had called that morning to inform them that the mortgage payment had been reversed and they were now in default. He asked if I knew anything about it, if maybe there was some kind of mistake. The second voicemail was different. His voice was smaller, more broken. He said he'd figured it out, that he'd been wondering how they'd managed to stay current on the payments when his disability barely covered groceries. He asked me to call him back, said they needed to talk. The third voicemail was just him crying. I didn't call back immediately. Instead, I read through the group chat messages. My sister's tone had changed dramatically from her casual dismissal the night before. She was asking where I was, demanding that I answer my phone. Mom had written several messages apologizing, saying there had been a misunderstanding, begging me to come over so we could work things out. My uncle had weighed in too, apparently having learned about the mortgage situation. He was furious, calling my sister and Mom ungrateful and short-sighted. My aunt had added her own message, expressing shock that they'd turned away the family member who'd been keeping them housed. But it was my nephew's message that hit hardest. He was only 14, but he'd figured out what happened. He wrote that he was sorry they'd been mean to me and asked if I was still going to help them keep the house because he didn't want to move schools again. I finally called Dad back around 2 in the afternoon. When he answered, his voice was hoarse from crying. He asked me to come over, said we needed to talk face to face. I told him I was flying back to Denver that evening, that my flight was already booked. He was quiet for a long time, then asked if this was about last night. I told him it wasn't about last night specifically, but about the pattern of being treated like an outsider while simultaneously being expected to carry the family's financial burdens in secret. Dad tried to explain that Mom had been stressed about hosting, that my sister had convinced her I preferred smaller gatherings anyway. He said they didn't know about the mortgage payments, that if they had known, last night never would have happened. I asked him why it took a financial crisis for anyone to consider whether their treatment of me was acceptable. I told him I'd spent 3 years feeling like a stranger at family gatherings while bleeding money to keep them afloat, and that nobody had seemed concerned about my comfort or inclusion until the payments stopped. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. Dad apologized repeatedly, promised things would change, begged me to reconsider the mortgage payments. I told him I loved him, but that I needed time to think about what our relationship was going to look like going forward. My sister called 30 minutes later. The conversation was tense from the start. She accused me of being manipulative, of using money to control the family. She said I was being petty and vindictive, that I was punishing everyone for what was essentially a misunderstanding. I asked her to explain what exactly had been misunderstood. She couldn't give me a straight answer. Eventually, she admitted that she'd been the one to suggest excluding me, claiming that family dinners were more relaxed when it was just the core family. She said she hadn't meant anything malicious by it. I told her that impact mattered more than intent, and that her text message about me making things awkward had made it clear this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She got defensive, saying I was always too serious, that I never seemed to enjoy myself at family gatherings anyway. The irony was thick. I'd been distant at family gatherings because I was stressed about money, working extra hours to cover their mortgage while watching my own savings disappear. I'd been quiet because I was tired from picking up overtime shifts. But instead of checking in with me or asking if something was wrong, they decided I was the problem and solved it by excluding me. The conversation with my sister ended badly. She hung up after telling me I was being selfish and that I was going to destroy the family over hurt feelings. Update 1. I flew back to Denver that evening as planned. The weekend was quiet, which was exactly what I needed. I spent Saturday morning at the gym, Saturday afternoon reading, and Sunday meal prepping for the week. It felt good to focus on my own life for once. Monday morning brought more calls and messages, but the tone had shifted again. Mom had apparently spent the weekend researching how quickly they could lose the house if they defaulted on the mortgage. The reality of their situation was setting in. Dad called Monday evening with a different approach. Instead of begging or apologizing, he asked practical questions. How long had I been making the payments? How much total had I contributed? Was there any way to work out a payment plan where they could gradually take over the mortgage themselves? I appreciated the straightforward conversation. I told him I'd been making the payments for 36 months, totaling just over $28,000. I explained that I'd planned to continue until the mortgage was paid off, but that the situation had fundamentally changed my perspective on family dynamics. Dad was quiet when I told him the total amount. He said he'd had no idea it was that much money, that he'd assumed the payments were maybe $200 or $300. When I told him it was $800 a month, he asked how I'd managed it on my salary. I explained about the canceled vacations, the roommate I'd kept longer than planned, the side consulting work I'd taken on weekends. I told him about the promotion I'd turned down because it required relocating to Seattle, and how I'd stayed in Denver partly to be closer to family. The conversation was painful for both of us. Dad kept apologizing, saying he never would have accepted the help if he'd known what it was costing me. I told him that was exactly why I hadn't told him, because I knew he'd refuse and they'd lose the house. We talked for over an hour. Dad promised he'd speak with Mom and my sister about how they'd been treating me. He said he was ashamed that I'd been carrying this burden alone while being made to feel unwelcome in my own family. Tuesday brought a call from Mom. She was crying before she even said hello. She said she'd been thinking about every family gathering for the past 3 years, trying to see them from my perspective. She realized that they'd been treating me like an obligation rather than a loved family member. Mom apologized for listening to my sister's suggestion about Thanksgiving dinner. She said she'd been overwhelmed with hosting and had taken the easy path instead of considering my feelings. She asked if there was any way to make things right. I told her that the money wasn't the real issue, that the mortgage payments had been my choice and I didn't regret helping them. The issue was being treated like an outsider while simultaneously being expected to act like family when it came to financial support. Mom asked what I needed from them to rebuild trust. I told her I needed to see consistent effort to include me and value my presence, not just when they needed something from me. I said I needed my sister to acknowledge that her behavior had been hurtful and commit to changing it. The conversation was more productive than I'd expected. Mom admitted that they'd fallen into a pattern of taking me for granted, assuming I'd always be there regardless of how they treated me. She said she wanted to change that, but asked for patience while they figured out how. Update 2. Wednesday brought the call I'd been dreading. My sister finally called back, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down on her position. She said I was being dramatic and manipulative, using money as a weapon to get my way. She accused me of keeping the mortgage payments secret specifically so I could use them as leverage later. She said that if I'd really wanted to help the family, I would have been transparent about it from the beginning. I tried to explain that I'd kept it secret because I knew Dad's pride would prevent him from accepting help, and because I hadn't wanted to create family drama around money. She said that was condescending, that I'd made financial decisions for the family without consulting anyone. The conversation became heated when she suggested that I'd engineered the entire situation to make myself look like the victim. She said I'd probably been planning to withdraw support all along, and that Thanksgiving dinner had just given me an excuse. I lost my temper at that point. I told her that I'd sacrificed 3 years of my own financial goals to keep their parents housed, and that I'd never asked for gratitude or recognition. I said that the only thing I'd wanted was to be treated with basic respect and inclusion, and that even that had been too much to ask. She said I was being oversensitive, that family dynamics were complicated, and I needed to accept that not every gathering could revolve around my feelings. She said I was punishing everyone for her decision, which wasn't fair to Mom and Dad. I told her she was right about one thing. I was punishing everyone for her decision. But that was because her decision had revealed how the entire family viewed me, and I couldn't continue enabling that dynamic. The call ended with her saying she hoped I was happy with myself for potentially making our parents homeless over a perceived slight. I hung up without responding. Thursday was quiet. No calls, no messages. I spent the evening researching financial advisors, thinking about what to do with the money I'd been spending on the mortgage. $800 a month could go a long way toward my own goals. Friday brought a surprise call from my uncle. He'd apparently had his own conversation with my sister and was calling to apologize on behalf of the family. He said he'd been unaware of the mortgage situation and was horrified by how I'd been treated. My uncle asked if I'd consider a family meeting to work through the issues. He offered to mediate, saying that everyone needed to acknowledge their role in the situation before moving forward. I told him I'd think about it, but that I wasn't ready to commit to anything yet. That evening, Dad called again. His voice was different, more determined. He said he'd spent the week looking into their financial options and had found a way to cover the mortgage payments themselves. It would be tight, and they'd need to make some lifestyle changes, but it was possible. He said he didn't want me to continue the payments out of obligation or guilt. If I chose to help them in the future, he wanted it to be because I genuinely wanted to, not because I felt trapped by their circumstances. I was impressed by his approach. Instead of pressuring me to resume payments, he was taking responsibility for their situation and working toward independence. I told him I appreciated that, and that it made me more inclined to consider helping in the future. Update 3. The weekend brought an unexpected development. My nephew called me directly, something he'd never done before. He said he'd been listening to the family discussions and wanted to apologize for not speaking up when I was excluded from Thanksgiving dinner. He said he'd noticed that I always seemed sad at family gatherings, but hadn't realized it was because everyone was treating me badly. He asked if I was really never going to visit again, because he missed having someone to talk to about college plans and career advice. The call was heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time. It reminded me that family relationships aren't monolithic, and that my issues with my sister and parents didn't have to define my relationship with him. I told him that I wasn't cutting off the family permanently, but that I needed to see changes in how I was treated before I'd be comfortable at family gatherings again. He asked what kinds of changes, and I explained about feeling excluded and taken for granted. He was quiet for a while, then said he'd never thought about it from my perspective. He promised to speak up if he saw anyone treating me badly in the future, and asked if we could still talk on the phone even if I wasn't coming to family events. I assured him that my relationship with him didn't depend on my relationship with his parents. and that I'd always be available if he needed advice or just wanted to talk. He seemed relieved by that. Monday brought a group text from Mom, addressed to the entire family. She announced that they'd be hosting a family meeting the following weekend to discuss communication and inclusion. She said everyone needed to commit to honest conversation and accountability. My sister responded first, saying she thought the meeting was unnecessary drama and that we should just move on. My uncle quickly shut that down, saying that moving on without addressing the underlying issues would just lead to more problems. Dad added that the meeting wasn't optional for anyone who wanted to remain part of family gatherings going forward. He said that everyone needed to understand how their actions affected others and commit to doing better. I appreciated the unified front from Mom, Dad, and my uncle. It suggested that they'd been talking seriously about the family dynamics and were committed to change. I agreed to attend the meeting via video call, since I wasn't ready to fly back so soon. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, giving everyone time to prepare. The week leading up to the meeting was tense. My sister sent several messages to the group chat, alternating between apologizing and defending her actions. She seemed to be struggling with the idea that she'd been genuinely wrong rather than just misunderstood. By Friday, she'd sent me a private message asking if we could talk before the family meeting. She said she'd been thinking about our conversation and wanted to clear the air. I agreed to the call, curious about her change in tone. When we talked Friday evening, she was more subdued than I'd heard her in years. She said she'd been talking to her husband about the situation, and he'd helped her understand how her actions had looked from my perspective. She admitted that she'd been jealous of the attention I got from our parents, even though most of that attention was worry about my work stress and lack of social life. She said she'd seen my distance at family gatherings as disinterest rather than recognizing that something might be wrong. The apology felt genuine, though I could tell it was difficult for her. She asked if there was a way to rebuild our relationship, acknowledging that it would take time and consistent effort on her part. I told her that I appreciated her honesty and was willing to work on our relationship, but that actions would matter more than words going forward. She said she understood and was committed to doing better. Saturday's family meeting was emotionally exhausting, but ultimately productive. Everyone had a chance to speak about their perspective on the situation, and we established some ground rules for future interactions. The most important outcome was an agreement that major family decisions, including guest lists for gatherings, would be discussed with everyone involved rather than made unilaterally. We also agreed to check in with each other more regularly instead of assuming everything was fine. Regarding the mortgage, I told them I was willing to resume payments on a temporary basis while they worked toward financial independence. We set a timeline of 18 months for them to take over the full payments, with my contribution decreasing gradually over that period. The arrangement felt fair to everyone. It gave them time to adjust their finances without the immediate threat of foreclosure, while ensuring that I wasn't locked into permanent financial support. 3 months later, our family dynamics have improved significantly. I attended Christmas dinner and actually enjoyed myself for the first time in years. My sister has made genuine effort to include me in conversations and family planning. The mortgage situation resolved successfully. My parents were able to take over full payments 2 months ahead of schedule, thanks to Dad finding part-time work that accommodated his health limitations. Looking back, that painful Thanksgiving was a catalyst for conversations we should have had years earlier. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal the cracks in relationships and create the motivation to fix them. I learned that helping family members financially can create complicated dynamics if it's not done transparently. I also learned that my own communication patterns had contributed to the problem, and that speaking up about feeling excluded might have prevented the crisis entirely. The experience taught me to value myself and my contributions, while also showing me that relationships can heal if everyone is willing to do the hard work of honest communication and change.